DeMaurice Smith. He's going to be discussing leadership and how successful branding and that branding strategy can really ignite your team. DeMaurice was the unanimous choice when he was elected as the executive director of the National Football League Players Association, NFLPA. Prior to joining the Players Association, he was practicing as a trial lawyer. Given his vast experience, we are certainly thrilled to have Mr. Smith's insight into leadership in this ever-changing business landscape. Please welcome Mr. DeMaurice Smith.
Good morning. How are you? Oh, come on. Good morning. First of all, show of hands real quick. I feel like as one of the few Washington natives still in D.C., how many people from out of town? Wow. Welcome to Washington. Welcome to my home. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm looking forward to a great conversation. And Trish, thank you for that wonderful introduction. What most people don't know is I'm a trial lawyer by trade. So trial lawyers, we're used to telling the crowd exactly, telling the jury exactly what we're going to do. Then we tell them again what we're going to do. Then we do it, and then we remind them what we've just done. So here's what we're going to do this morning. I want to talk a little bit about something that's really important to me, what I call North Star leadership, which is basically my belief that when you look for good leaders, when you want to invest something that is important, when you want to achieve a goal that is good for everyone, the type of leader that you are going to want to look for, the type of leader that I try to be, and certainly the type of leader that I expect our young men to be in the NFLPA, are value-based leaders. And I call it North Star leadership. And a little later, I want to talk about what I believe North Star leadership is. Before that, we're going to have some time for questions and answers. And I understand that there are cards on your table if you wish to write down questions. I'm a guy, again, like a trial lawyer. I will answer every question. It may not be the truth, but I will answer every question. But before that, let me give you a little bit of background. The one thing that Trish left off, I was actually a homicide prosecutor for 6 years in this town. And if there is anything that I learned about leadership, things that I learned about what it means to represent a group of people, in that case, I was representing the United States of America. But if I learned one thing about that was, while I loved the job of being an assistant U.S. attorney here in the District of Columbia, I have to tell you, I loved trying cases. I mean, there is nothing on this planet that I've done in a business context that gave me more of a thrill than trying a murder case. Why? There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. You know, so the beauty of trying a murder case was you got ramped up for something that was truly important. You got your team together. Everybody was behind one mission. There was a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it was great because whether the jury voted guilty or not guilty, they always voted guilty. I'm happy to say. But whether they voted guilty or not guilty, there was an end. And I go from that to a law firm, now into a wonderful job that I've had for almost nearly 10 years. And the one thing that I can tell you as the executive director of the NFL Players Association, there really is no beginning, there really is no middle, and it looks like there's never going to be an end. I've had this job for 9 wonderful years. But the difference between this job and the job of trying murder cases is I realized, it took me about 7 years to realize it, so I'm slightly ahead of my class, not. But I learned that there is no end. There is no middle, there is no beginning. And in a certain way, this job, the job that I have, and I would like to share with you a little bit, is learning how to lead from the epicenter. And if you think about an epicenter, the first thing that pops into our head is the epicenter is always that thing in the middle of what? An earthquake, some seismic event, some trauma, some drama. But what happens after that epicenter? You have concentric circles that move where? Out, right? And so leading from the epicenter, as opposed to trying a case with a beginning, a middle, and an end, leading from the epicenter means that there are simply concentric circles that literally move outward into infinity. And it took a little bit of time for me to understand that instead of looking at my job based on what you and I talked about earlier, a job description, there is a big difference between my job description and what I do every day. What I do every day, lead from the epicenter. And so for the next few minutes, before we head into questions, I want to talk about a little bit about leading from the epicenter and what it means for me and what I think it means for any person who finds himself in a leadership position in today's business climate. The fact is, if you think about those epicenters, those circles, those concentric circles that flow out of that event, two things about those circles. One, they go on forever, but the one thing about the circle is what? There's no beginning, there's no middle, and there is no end. And so our job now, especially today, and I think that is somewhat unique in where we find ourselves both socially and politically, there are things in which our business, we have to deal with every day, you have to deal with every day, that doesn't necessarily fit your job description. I mean, think about it. For us, for our union, you could say, well, this guy's job is to simply manage the pensions, take care of the health care, make sure that the workplace is safe, and make sure that there's a good transition period for football players after football. I mean, that's a great job description. That job description does not include bounty. That job description does not include Deflategate. Didn't even think about concussions the way we think about concussions 10 years ago. Transition, healthcare, mental health, drug cases, drug abuse, mental health, all of those things are things now that I find myself doing every day that might not necessarily match my job description. But I will tell you, they are part of those concentric circles. So the quicker that I was able to embrace those things as being absolutely ingrained in what my job is, was really the first day that I understood what it meant to lead from the epicenter. And today in business, I see exactly the same thing. The good old days, you measured your business by the traditional measurements we may have learned in business school or the traditional measurements we learned in law school. What's your P&L? What does Moody's say about us? What does Fitch say about us? What's our share price? Does it go up? Does it go down? Today, just in the last few weeks, what have we seen? We saw Amazon do something with respect to minimum wage. Why? In response to pressure about social inequality, minimum wage, and working conditions. You saw Starbucks shut down all of their stores for a day for training on racial sensitivity in the marketplace. Facebook, great company, finds themselves hauled up on Capitol Hill, forced to engage in really interesting conversations about what? Privacy. All of those things are those concentric circles that move out and now become the everyday thing that CEOs, C-level executives have to deal with on a daily basis. But here's the good news. That's where we want to be. I honestly believe that's where we want to be. Why? Because either we have to make a decision that our job and the people who work with us and the people who work to try to accomplish our mission, we are all going to either be one team and have ourselves focused on all the things that matter, or we are going to be separately siloed, focused on all the things that matter to individual people. And I know one thing. I know that that's not a team. That's not a team. So for us, there used to be a day where the National Football League was purely graded and ranked on what are our ratings like, how many fans attend. Am I happy now that our job is focused on things about the health safety, well-being of our employees that you call NFL players? Yes. Am I happy that we have created groups within our office to make sure that players transition out of football and live the balance of their lives as healthy, productive members of society? Yes. Does that have anything to do with the game? No. So one of the things I'm happy about saying in this job, I spend more time focusing on things that have nothing to do with the game of football. And because those things are always dealing with those items, those concentric circles, I know that even though I'm embracing all those things now, those are the important things. So if I could bring up the slides, let me talk about a couple of examples of leading from the center. 3 prescriptions for leading from the epicenter. First, leading in the moment. Everybody know who this picture is? Jack Kemp. What most people don't realize is prior to becoming a United States Senator, Jack Kemp played in the, did he play in the NFL or the AFL? AFL, very good. Buffalo, outstanding. It's your year, Buffalo. It's your year. Now, of course, I say that about every team. But it's your year. I mean it. I do. Before Jack Kemp was a U.S. Senator, played in the American Football League. In 1970, the AFL merged with the NFL. Jack Kemp, what very few people know, was the president of the AFL Players Association. There was another man who was the president of the NFL Players Association, a man by the name of John Mackey. Jack Kemp, all-star quarterback. John Mackey, all-pro tight end. The day that John Mackey became the president of the NFL Players Association, he went from a 4-time all-pro player to number 3 on the depth chart with the Colts. But he led in the moment. Everybody knew and everybody told him that you becoming the president of the NFL Players Association was going to cost you your starting job. And it did. He went on certainly to be inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame. Jack Kemp went on to become a United States Senator. But the story about leading in the moment, 2 men, 2 different backgrounds, 2 different leagues, brought together for one common purpose. Who is going to be a leader of the players of the NFL Players Association? And instead of having a fight, these 2 men went into a back room, shook hands, and decided who was going to be the president and who was going to be the vice president. Leading in the moment. And for us, for our union, that's what we champion. Because these decisions to be an individual team leader, an individual rep, it's not so bad as it was in the past, but in the past, it literally meant that it probably was going to cost you your job. So the first prescription about how to lead from the epicenter, that moment of eruption, that moment of the earthquake creates an opportunity. And I believe it's our job to seize that opportunity and lead in the moment. Next example. Leading by example. This is who? Joe Montana, leading by example. 1983, 1989, there were strikes brought by the NFL Players Association. The union decided that they were going to go on strike because there really weren't any effective pensions for former players, and the primary issue of why the players went on strike was for the first time to create a defined benefit for players who generally played only 3 years in the National Football League. And when you're leading by example, there is always going to be a time when people are going to look for people to step into that role, people to step up and rise to that challenge. There's 2 stories that I want to tell about this. Joe Montana, certainly first ballot Hall of Famer. Up until yesterday, might have been called the greatest quarterback of all time. Man, what a game. I grew up a Redskins fan. Wrong night. But when you're talking about people who you need to step up and lead by example, there are certainly wonderful players who excel on the field, and we love that. There are people who love their team. There are people who are experts at what they do in a job. But when it comes to our union and leading by example, we don't necessarily care how good of a player you are on the field. We care about how good of a servant you are to the men in your locker room. So in 1983, when the union decided to go on strike and the players went on strike, people had to make a choice about what kind of example they would be. Joe Montana decided that even though his union was going to go on strike, that Joe Montana was going to cross the picket line. And so for us, when a player decides that instead of being a servant leader, he's going to be a selfish leader, that is the difference between what type of leader you want to be the right example and what type of leader you want to be the wrong example. Who's this? Who? Dan the Man Marino. And I just dig the shorts, right? Right, nice and high. Woo! Dan Marino, same strike, same outstanding player, same first ballot Hall of Famer, different example. A player who decided that he was going to stay on the picket line with his members, fight for the pensions that they deserved. Two people, same situation, different example. Second prescription for leading from the epicenter. First, leading in the moment. Find those leaders who are willing to lead by example. Embrace those leaders who are willing to lead by example. And I will promise you, and I will tell you, there will be people who will be good examples and people who will be bad. But once again, those circles where there's no beginning, no end, and no middle, the challenge of leadership is dealing with that fact each and every day. Last prescription for leading from the epicenter. First, leading in the moment, leading by example. Last, leading above the noise. Today, I can tell you right now that I have a Twitter account. I do not tweet. I don't know how. I am like an old man with a remote control. I have simply become my father. It is. Do people tweet for me? Yes. We can have a wonderful conversation about Twitter. I think there's great things about it, but one thing that, and I can tell you, I don't spend all day reading Twitter. Why? There is a lot of noise. And for leaders and anybody who find themselves in a position of leadership, the challenge for me is how to figure out what to listen to, when to listen to it, and what to do about it. But I have figured out one thing. I cannot be distracted or engulfed in the noise. So let me tell you a story about the noise. 2011, my good friend Roger Goodell and I, thank you for that. You guys laughed, and I didn't have to say anything, so I can enjoy plausible deniability. We had a dust-up, and the dust-up in 2009 leading up to the lockout in 2011 was that the league wanted the players to play 18 games. They wanted the players to give up their pensions, and they wanted the players to give up 20% of their salary. Other than those three things, the deal was great. It's fantastic. As I like to say, he had me at hello. We didn't like that deal. So the challenge for us was, while everybody who covered the sport of football decided that they were going to frame this fight over a fight between millionaires and billionaires in sort of a dismissive way, instead of fans deciding that, well, I just want to see our guys play. I don't want to get wrapped up in a labor fight. Well, for the 1,900 men who play in the National Football League, this is their profession. This is their business. So when it came to the issue of 18 games, it wasn't really a decision or a conversation by the players of, will the fans love 18 games? It was a question of, right now in the National Football League, our injury rate is 100%. 100. So the question becomes, if you have an average career of approximately 3.3, 3.5 years, what does 2 extra games do to your increased exposure to injury, your increased exposure to long-term pain and suffering, and most importantly, early retirement? Does an 18-game schedule seem like a good idea or a bad idea? Well, from where we stood, it was let me think, carry the one. It was awful. You saw pictures of Dan Marino standing on a sideline fighting for a pension. So when the National Football League came to the players of the National Football League in 2011 and said, we want you to move away from a defined benefit plan, yes, there were people who said, well, wait a minute, defined benefit plans are dinosaurs. They're going out of way. They're going out of style. For the players of the National Football League, however, what's a pension? A pension was something that Dan Marino was willing to potentially lose his job for. A pension was something that John Mackey lost his job for. So when you're talking about rising above the noise, a pension became a fight for, are we going to stand together as a group of men and fight for something that other men gave up their careers for? Above the noise. And so on that first game of the season in 2011, it was the last season before we were going to get locked out. I happened to be down in New Orleans. It was the Thursday night football game between the Minnesota Vikings and the New Orleans Saints. There were 2 union leaders who sat on the executive committee on both of those teams. One was Steve Hutchinson, offensive lineman for the Minnesota Vikings. Fantastic leader. On the other side, on the executive committee, I'm trying to think of that guy's name. You saw him last night. Drew, remind me. Yeah, Drew Brees was on the executive committee as well that elected me in 2009. And I will tell you, I really honestly don't remember who won this game. I don't remember a play. I don't remember where I was during the game. The only thing I remember about that game is that before the game, I had a conversation with Drew Brees and Steve Hutchinson, and they said, we want to do something as a group of men that shows to everybody that we are going to be one team, that we're going to rise above the noise, we're going to lead by example, we're going to lead in the moment, but we want to send a signal to everyone that this is going to be a group of people who aren't going to cross the picket line. That these are people who, and yes, we're a union, we're not going to indulge scabs. Tough word, true. So on that night, on that field, those guys decided that right after the coin toss, the Minnesota Vikings were going to be led out to midfield by Steve Hutchinson. The New Orleans Saints were going to be led out by Drew Brees. And after that coin toss, every last one of those players was going to hold one finger in the air to show everyone that they were going to be one team. And like I said, I don't remember the score. All I know is that from that Thursday night into that Sunday, virtually every NFL player stood on that sideline and rose above the noise, became a leader in the moment, and led by example. So, when we talk about leading from the epicenter, and I'm done with the slides, thank you. When we talk about leading from the epicenter, it is an opportunity for leadership. It's an opportunity for each and every one of us to seize the moment and not look at those concentric circles as obstacles, but more importantly, look at that as the context in which we are called as leaders and embrace it. And I will tell you 2 things that I think are true. One, it will not be easy. It will not be easy. Number two, I promise you it will be rewarding. So, what I want to do now, promised you, I want to move on to questions for a few minutes. We're going to do that for a few minutes, and then I'm going to come back and hopefully say a couple of things about value-based leadership. Does that sound cool? Yes. Thank you. Where's, there she is. Yes.
Can I join you? Yeah. Okay.
Do you have a seat that you prefer?
I'm happy to go right here,
done.
closest to me. So we got some questions from the audience. Good questions, very, very good questions.
Every question's a good question.
All of them are good. So I'm going to start with the most topical, which is, what are your thoughts on the NFL Players Union's reaction to the new national anthem rule?
Well, the national anthem rule, the league has made the decision to not enforce the rule that they imposed unilaterally during the offseason. And look, we're a union, and I don't apologize for representing the interest of the players. Roger doesn't apologize for representing the interest of the owners. And I think that the good thing about our business is we have a good relationship. And we have a healthy understanding of who we represent. My thoughts on the anthem and the reason why we filed a grievance against the league for that is I also believe in free speech. And we reached a standstill agreement where they decided to not enforce their rule. We decided not to enforce our litigation. And it was because I asked Roger for sort of to indulge a crazy idea. Why don't we talk? It's odd, but as a group of people who are blessed to work in this business, why don't we get a group of owners to sit down and talk with a group of players so that we can understand where you're coming from, you can understand where the players are coming from. And since we both care about our communities, what if we come together and actually try to improve our communities, employ ourselves in the business of social justice? And that's what we've done.
Did it take on a life of its own that perhaps no one intended?
I don't know what the answer is to that. I mean, we're in football. I mean, we have we have literally hundreds of millions of impressions every year. You're in the business like we are. I'm not sure that in today's environment with 24-hour news, access to Twitter, social media, I'm not sure anything takes on a life of its own anymore. I think that anything we do, anything that you do, anything that I do, certainly anything that my kids might be thinking about doing, don't do that, can easily take on a life of its own because it becomes the property of social media, right? So no, I don't really think that anything takes on a life of its own. I think certainly people, as people have always done, use it for their own ends. Is
that what Colin Kaepernick was trying to do?
I think that any player who uses his political platform is acting in the same way that a politician uses his political platform.
Should he not?
Which one are we talking about? The politician or the player?
I'm just curious because no, the player,
right.
Because they're hired to go and play football.
Right.
I'm just playing devil's advocate
right.
here. Whereas the politician is supposed to get up and spout off his or her political platform.
Well, I would disagree with you on the spout off part because I believe that people who want to work in public service should have a servant's heart. And if you have a servant's heart, I'm not sure that's consistent with spouting off about anything
Okay, so
you want.
perhaps wrong verb choice, but my point is...
So going to Colin, there was never a point that Colin impacted the game, right? He played the game. When it was time for him to walk out on that field and take on the risk of being a player, he did it. When it was time for him to be and enjoy and perform at the job, he did it. So we can always disagree, certainly, about everything. But I'm never going to agree with someone when they say that a player who's doing something either before the game or after the game is doing something that denigrates or interferes with the game.
I'm going to move on. Sure. It's in the next one here. This is a concern of mine. I have a little boy, and well, his dad was a basketball player.
Yeah?
So
how old's your son?
My son is 6, so with any luck, he'll get a little bit of height and maybe a little bit of coordination, none of which I really have. So football's probably not in the cards, just given the basketball background. But you know, if it were, what could you say to me is being done, should be done to assure that my son would be safe playing and even going on to have a career, should he be so lucky in the NFL?
Sure.
Because I think, you know, all those players out there, and we keep talking about new helmets and how better helmets should be made, et cetera, hasn't happened yet.
Well,
is it on the way, and what are you doing to protect them?
Well, I'll try to keep it in under an hour and a half. New helmets are, helmet technology has changed significantly over the last few years. Do I think that that we've seen the market advancements or the technological advancements in helmets that we should have? No. I mean, that's a conversation for another day. But the reality is, what have we done? Well, in 2009, when I took this job and that's been dog years, by the way, I was testifying on Capitol Hill by the fall. And in the fall of 2009, I remember a hearing called by Chairman Conyers, where I had to tell Chairman Conyers that the head of the NFL's concussion committee was a rheumatologist. A rheumatologist. So what have we done? We are zero-sum about protecting the health and safety of our players. And we are zero-sum in what we believe is enforcing the employer's obligation to keep and maintain a workplace that is as safe as possible. So 10 years ago, you didn't have sideline concussion experts. 10 years ago, there wasn't baseline testing in the National Football League. So what I would tell a mother or a father, and more importantly, what I would tell a young man who wants to play football, I would say that has the sport become safer? Yes. Does it mean that professional football is a safe sport? No. The job is to try to make it as safe as possible. And for every parent who is thinking about their son or daughter playing football or any sport, to understand the risks that come with that sport and to not be sort of a shy, this is the game, this is the way the game is played, this is a necessary and acceptable risk. There are more concussions in girls' soccer than virtually any other sport. There's more concussions in soccer more than any other sport. Yet, for whatever reason, if you look at soccer in the Premier League, they lag far behind what we've been doing in the NFL for the last 6 or 7 years. I don't believe that our neurologists are smarter than their neurologist. I just believe that some people have made the decision within their sport that instead of accepting risk, accept the fact that you can change, mitigate, and in some cases eliminate that risk. And if it means changing the game, it's a game, right? Let's not get it twisted. It's wonderful. Sports is great. I was a terrible high school football player. And look, I still am a terrible athlete. But at the end of the day, I don't think that we should take something like a sport and simply say that we can't force it to change. If we're going to do anything, and if there is any one bedrock principle about this great country, is I do believe that the moral arc in this country bends towards good. And I believe that people, for the most part, in their hearts, are good. There is no reason for us to look at a sport and say that instead of changing the sport, we're just gonna let the sport be the same at the expense of the person.
I'm with you on that, but the flip side of that is that players are vulnerable because they're given these fantastic contracts. They're very young. They want to play. They want to be in the game. And so where do you get the will? I mean, you're not necessarily going to get it from the owners, whose fans want to see them play the game they've always played.
Yeah, you're going to get it from a union. So let's flip. Let's take your example and put it into college, right? Same game. Same violent game. Yet in college, we don't have the same protocols that we have in the professional leagues. Why? Because there's no union. Because at the end of the day, every athletic director makes the decision about how things are going to run. And you have a head of the NCAA that still, for whatever reason, hasn't eliminated two-a-day practices, hasn't put in the same level of protocol protections that we have in the National Football League. Once again, I don't believe that their neurologists are dumber than our neurologists. I just think that there is and has been a force for change in professional football that oddly has trickled down to high school sports. But what you've seen that I find is the anomaly is you have protocols being enacted at the professional level. Virtually everybody here who has sons and daughters who play high school sports, my guess is most of your kids have had baseline testing. That didn't exist a few years ago. But yet there's this delta. Yeah. And right in the middle of that delta is the professional leagues of college football.
Listen, both my husband and my father were both Division I basketball players, and they would both tell you that they worked full-time, nonstop. Oh. It was a job.
I have a son there now.
Should college players be paid?
I'm a lawyer, so I can argue that all day. But here's what I'll say about.
But they're not being represented. To your point, they don't have a union. They don't have anybody really looking out for them. And if they bust their knee and are never able to play in the big leagues, there goes that career.
Different, right? And that's where I want to go, because I think before you get to the question of should college players be paid, I do believe that there is a bunch of lower hanging fruit before you get there. The first one that you mentioned is dead on. If you are a senior college athlete and you have a significant injury as a senior, there is no health care for you as an athlete where you are entitled to insured health care after you leave college.
I knew we'd bring it around to insurance.
It's my which is why there's an opportunity. But that's low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, because why would we want any of our sons and daughters dealing with tail-end medical injuries that they incurred while they were playing in a college sport that they have to pay for out of their own pocket when they leave? There should be no over-recruiting for any college sport. And if you don't know what over-recruiting is, for example, you could be you're a coach at a Division I school and you've recruited 6 potential linebackers for your team. Well, sometimes coaches do that knowing they only have 3 scholarships. So you'll go through summer ball and you'll find out that you're one of the 3 that's not going to get the scholarship. So now you're stuck at the school because you can't transfer without sitting out a year. So let's end over recruiting. Last thing is, yes, you do get scholarships, and as the father of a scholarship athlete, Division I athlete, I can tell you that even a full scholarship doesn't cover all of the expenses. And so as a result, you do have a group of kids who are, yes, getting a full scholarship, but nonetheless living below the poverty line. I don't believe that any scholarship athlete should live below the poverty line. And last, going to the number of hours that every one of our especially Division I players, if you're a 4-year Division I athlete, I think you should be given 5 years to graduate. Because you're spending, I know that there's rules, but you tend to spend more time at the athletic facility than you have, and you are carrying a full load and working a full-time job. And I think that if you do that for 4 years, the college should give you an extra year to graduate.
Yeah, the money thing is tough in that, gosh, a lot of these kids, you're not allowed to work
Right.
while you're there, so you can't
Right.
even have a job at the cafeteria, so
Right.
you don't have money to go for a pizza
Right.
on a Friday night.
Right.
Anyway, we'll leave the college discussion for another time. I want to turn back to what happens to these players after they have been in the professional league and they're suddenly making money, perhaps more money than they'd ever seen in their lives. And easy come, easy go. What can be done, should be done? Are you working with players or advocating some sense of financial responsibility and, importantly, financial planning?
Yeah. We offer a tremendous amount of financial services to our players. I mean, the good news is there is a awful statistic that ESPN threw out, I think about 20 years ago, about the bankruptcy rate of players that wasn't really based on anything but a guy guessing. The most recent study that we have is about 17% of our players are in some sort of financial extremis within 5 years after football. So am I happy that it's not 78%? 17% is still too high. So we do provide financial counseling, life skills for all of our players. But perhaps the most important thing, the thing that I'm the happiest about, in 2011, we also created something called the Trust. And the Trust is available to any player that has played at least 2 years in the National Football League. And it provides you comprehensive services to transition into your life. And whether that's financial assistance, mental health assistance, substance abuse assistance, if you've played 2 years in the National Football League, you go to school for free. If you don't have your college degree, we pay for it. If you want to get an advanced degree, we pay for it. If you want to learn a trade, we pay for it. So at the end of the day, the Trust doesn't get a lot of discussion on ESPN, nor should it, but it might be the best thing we've ever done.
Congratulations. Have you considered annuities as we continue on with this sort of trust,
We do.
et cetera, or insurance products in rookie contracts to help protect players? In other words, is there a way to give them some kind of safety net of
Yes.
guaranteed income?
Yes, and I am a huge fan of, it's just another way of saying deferred compensation, right? So whether it's set up as an annuity or whether it's set up as a Bobby Bonilla-like deferred compensation plan, I think that every player should have a deferred compensation plan. Currently, we have 3 annuities for players who vest, and we have the best retirement program of any professional sport. But am I a believer that every player who comes into the National Football League should have a portion of that amount deferred, whether it's in an annuity or something else? Absolutely. The only bad thing is we're a union, and I don't get to vote, right? It's majority where everyone gets heard, but majority rules. And it's something that I've advocated on behalf of our membership for years, but at the end of the day, the good thing about a democracy is everybody gets to vote, majority rules. The bad thing about a democracy is everybody gets heard and everybody gets to vote. So at the end of the day, my job, and it's a great one, we try to teach young men.
With that in mind, a continuation of that thought, one of the members of the audience writes, thank you, first of all, for your comments today on igniting and inspiring your team to achieve great success. As executive director of the Players Association, you are just a few years away from the expiration of a collective bargaining agreement. How do you inspire the members of your team, who have an average career length of just over 3 years, to make sacrifices that will only benefit those who are coming after them?
Great question. And forever whoever asked that question, please join me on the road. Here's the best thing about the job. It's not hard to inspire our players. I showed you pictures of John Mackey. After John retired, most of you know, he began a long descent into Alzheimer's and dementia. We created what's now called the Plan 88, named after John that's been in the collective bargaining agreement now for over 30 years that is designed to treat any player who has the early onset of a cognitive deficiency. But if I go into a locker room and tell a group of 20-something-year-old players, you're fighting for a benefit named after John Mackey, you know what's great? That's not a hard sell. If I can walk into a locker room and show them a picture of Peyton Manning standing on the sideline, raising one finger for one team, look, let's be blunt. Peyton Manning didn't need a union. Peyton Manning was one heck of a union leader. And when I can go into a locker room and tell the guys who were in college when I was elected in 2009, but they can see a picture of pre-Hall of Fame Drew Brees standing on the sideline raising one finger, you know, that's not a tough thing to inspire young men. And so the great thing about this job is you are surrounded with people who have a concept and understanding of sacrifice and team. My job is to cultivate it, nurture it, every now and then push it to the edge of explosion. But the best part of this job is you lead a group of men where I never have to define what a team is.
Yeah, I mean, that's your strength, right?
Yeah, 100%.
If you've got them behind you and they're united together, then the union is so much stronger
100%.
than if they're out on their own. Last question for you from the audience. What are the chances that the NFL Players Association strikes in 2021?
Remember I said I'd answer every question? Look, I think that we have a tremendous business. This year we will be a little bit north, probably of $15-16 billion. But are there storm clouds on the horizon? Yes. TV and the way in which our fans digest our game is changing. The television contracts are probably going to be different this time around. There are a number of reasons to stay home and watch games on television as opposed to when I was a kid growing up and watching this game. Your business is being digested by a group of millennials and a group of younger people in different ways than you and I digested our business or learned information. So all of those things are pressure points on our business where owners have one takeaway from it and players have another takeaway from it. Do I hope that we can avoid a work stoppage? Yes. But I do believe that the best way to avoid one is to make sure we're prepared for one. So we didn't ask for the fight in 2011. I don't think that we're going to be asking for a fight when this agreement expires in 2021. But if there is going to be a fight, everybody should pack their lunch.
Yeah, they want you on their side. Listen, you're doing great things.
Thank you.
Congratulations on all you're doing.
Awesome.
It's really interesting to get your perspective on it all. And I would say, keep talking. Keep those players and Roger and the owners all talking.
I just love that you called him Roger.
I know you're going to finish up.
Thank you.
We'll listen to
Thank you very
your
much.
comments.
I appreciate it. Thank you. So a couple of things to wrap up. As you know, I care a lot about value-based leadership. So leading from the epicenter, leading in the moment, leading by example, and leading above the noise. What does it mean? I call it North Star leadership because I can tell you from my own personal experience and pick your gate for us. Deflate gate, bounty gate, my wonderful relationship with the NFL owners, which is fantastic. There can be times when I become so mired in that epicenter that I can't see over the wall. I can't see around the circle. I don't even think that there is a top to the circle, let alone a way to get through it. So North Star leadership for me became something that I thankfully learned from somebody else. What are those core principles? What are those things that when you can't see your way through, when you don't know how to get around, when you can't dig under, when you can't get over, and most importantly, I'm not a big fan of slogans, but I am one of those guys who has always found himself in a position of leadership where, for whatever reason, the slogan that someone gave me about leadership just didn't seem to do it. Obstacles are there to be broken through. All right. Now what? I mean, right? For me, it mattered what were the principles of how we were going to deal with this. So I always start off with 3 principles. If we are sitting down and we have a problem, if there is an issue where we can't see our way through, a challenge that looks like it's going to be Herculean to us, what would I want to tell my kids about what they should do in this situation? At the end of the day, right, wrong, you made a good decision, bad decision, you won, you lost. What do I want to be able to say to my kids about how I would want them to handle the situation? I'd want them to be honest. I want them to be good. I want them to be servants. I want them to think about others over themselves, right? Number 2, what are those things that are core to your belief as an institution that you would want to carry on regardless of how you got through this? Same answers. We want our institution to be one that's good. We want to think of ourselves that even though we might have a job where it's to return a good P&L, do we want to be a good community? Do we want to be a good social partner? And I want to close on this. There are those days that I have that, at least over the last 5 or 6 years, seems to be almost every day. Those days where you start to feel sorry for yourself, days where you have everybody on the planet. I have to tell you, it is a great job where every day you can flick on ESPN, and there's about 30 people who are willing to tell you just how bad of a job you're doing. It's fantastic. It's noise. It's just noise. So on those days where I feel bad, I always like to go back to history because I do believe, and I'm a big believer in both philosophy and the lessons we learn from history. Middle of the Civil War to the end of the Civil War, Lincoln gets reelected president, and he stands up for his second inaugural. And remember, by this time, more people have died in the Civil War than soldiers who have died in any war we've had since. Near the time he was giving his second inaugural address, Lincoln didn't even know who was going to win the war, much less whether the nation was going to be preserved, whether or not this country, as it existed before, would continue to exist afterwards. And at the time he gave his second inaugural address, that was the first time that the winds had started to show that in all likelihood, the war was going to be won, the Union would be preserved, and this country, as he famously said, would not perish from the earth. In the last paragraph of his second inaugural address, now that he knows he's going to win the war, it wasn't a victory lap, it wasn't a chest thump. I don't know if they had chest thumps back then, but if you're going to chest thump Lincoln, you've got a pretty good vertical, right? But it wasn't a chest thump. It wasn't a victory lap. It most certainly wasn't a denigration of the people in the South who were going to lose the war. It wasn't petty. It wasn't trite. It wasn't selfish. It wasn't mean. Listen to this. With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and for his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with our nations. Wow. Leading in the moment, leading by example, leading above the noise, with a North Star leadership that is firmly grounded in values. So what I wish for every one of you, first, thank you for this wonderful opportunity to talk to you. As you find your own North Star leadership, my only hope, I do wish you success. But more importantly, I hope that you find your own North Star leadership that's grounded in values, and that all of us, regardless of whether we agree or disagree, can continue to do a lot of good where good is sorely needed. Thank you.